How much do you really know about the IELTS speaking test part 3? Before we get into the video, here's a short quiz to see how much you already know. So grab your notebooks, write down the answers, or write them in the comments. How long does the IELTS speaking test part 3 usually last? You can shout the answer at your phone or your screen or write them down. What topic is the IELTS part 3 speaking about? Is it okay to give personal opinions in the IELTS speaking part 3? Is it okay to use personal experience in the IELTS speaking part 3? Is it better to use simple language to avoid making mistakes in IELTS speaking part 3? It's important to actually be active when you're learning the IELTS, so actually do try to answer these questions in the comments or in your notebook. Pause the video and have a go. Did you pause it? Are you active learning? Okay, let's have a look to see if you are right. So question 1, how long does the IELTS speaking test usually last? The answer is between 5 and 6 minutes. They'll usually ask you between 4 and 5 questions, so you're looking at about 1 minute per answer. What is the topic of IELTS speaking part 3 about? The answer is, it is the same topic as your part 2 long term that you did when you read the cue card. So if your cue card in part 2 was about something you recently bought, then in part 3 it will be about shopping, consumerism, things like that. Number 3, is it okay to give your personal opinion in the IELTS speaking test, part 3? And the answer is yes, you definitely should do it. It's really encouraged to do so. Number 4, is it okay to use personal experience to support your answers? And again, yes, 100%, use your personal experience as examples. So 5, is it better to avoid simple language to avoid mistakes? The answer is no. In this one, you should have a go at using more complex language and more complex grammar, even if you make a mistake. I know from the writing videos, I always say simple is better, but in part 3, here's your chance to show off a little bit. It is obviously better if you know the grammatical structures and the vocabulary in advance, and I will show you some in this video so you can ace your IELTS speaking. Let's get on with the video. So I promised you an ultimate guide to the IELTS speaking part 3. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how to structure your answers and 3 different types of question that could come up. And we're also going to be looking at some language you can use for each of the different question types. It is a long video, relax, make yourself a cup of tea, make notes in your notebook, and I'll do my best to help you. The first thing we're going to look at is how to structure your answers with what I like to call the D.E.E.R method.
What a f-
No, not that kind of D.E.E.R. It is an acronym. Let's have a look at the slides to see what D.E.E.R stands for and look at some examples of how it's used. So the D.E.E.R acronym is the D-E-E-R. It spells D.E.E.R and it's a good way to remember how to answer your IELTS speaking part 3 questions. The D stands for a direct answer. The E is to explain your direct answer. The E is to give an example of what you were explaining, and the R is to restate or repeat your direct answer in a different way. It's like answer, explain, example, answer again. Let's have a look at the direct answer. In the direct answer, you need to answer directly the examiner's question. For example, if the examiner says, do you think that more people will speak English in the next 20 years? You don't want to be saying, I don't think that more people will speak English in the next 20 years, because you're mimicking the examiner and you're not giving any extra language. It's better to just be direct and say something like this. Do you think that more people will speak English in the next 20 years? Yes. It's short and to the point. But that's where the next part of the answer comes in. The E. Explain. Once you've given the examiner the D, or your direct answer, you then need to explain why. Here's where you give reasons for your direct answer, and maybe you can extend a little bit as well. So in the example, I said yes to the examiner's question of, do you think more people will speak English in the future? Here it is with an example. Do you think that more people will speak English in the next 20 years? Yes. I think that English will become the world's most spoken language. English is the language of the internet. And because a lot of people use the web, I think it will give people an incentive to learn English. Or something like this. I don't think so. English is already widely spoken, and I think it may have hit its peak. If China continues its growth, then I can see Mandarin being more widely spoken than English in the future. In these 2 explanations, I use some grammatical tools, I use conditionals, and I paraphrase the examiner's question and my own answer. Later on in the video, I'll be giving you specific grammatical structures and specific vocabulary and specific signpost words to use when answering the different kinds of IELTS speaking Part 3 questions. So stay tuned. Doing this helps you speak more naturally, which is a huge part of the IELTS speaking Part 3, and if you can say it with good fluency and pronunciation, you'll be well on your way to getting a high score in the IELTS speaking task Part 3. After this, you need to give examples. Giving examples are a great way to extend your answer and to use more grammatical structures and impress your examiner with your great vocabulary and coherence. The best way to give examples is to say, for example, and then give the examples, but I'm going to be showing you much more later on when we look at the specific questions. For now, here's an example of giving an example in the IELTS speaking test Part 3. Let's stick with the same question. Do you think that more people will speak English in the next 20 years? Absolutely. English is already used all over the world, and I can see more people communicating that way in the future. It's highly likely that it will become the world's second language. For example, if a French person is speaking to a Vietnamese person, then it is probable that they will communicate by using English if they both have it as a second language. Or something like, it's possible. English is the current global lingua franca, and I can't see that changing anytime soon. A lot of countries will adapt to speaking English so they don't become economically at disadvantage by being left behind. However, it's true that a lot of people are looking for a second language that reflects the current changing world order, such as Arabic or Chinese. For example, if Mandarin became the world's official second language, then it's likely that people would abandon English in favour of learning Mandarin. Our answers are looking pretty good now. We need to wrap it up in a little bow and add, restate or repeat your answer. Let's have a look at how it works. Restating or repeating your answer at the end wraps up your answer nicely and gives you some fluency and coherence to the answer. You shouldn't repeat exactly your direct answer, but just say it again in a different way. This lets the examiner know that you're finished answering, and he or she will ask you the next IELTS speaking Part 3 question. You could do this by saying something like, so yeah, it might happen, or I suppose it's possible. This gives you a natural way to end. Now, it is very important you shouldn't just religiously stick to this structure, but you can use it as a way to keep your answers going and to improve your fluency and cohesion. Now we're going to look at all the different question types that could come up in the IELTS speaking test Part 3. Speculating, evaluating, comparing and contrasting, and see how the D.E.E.R method is used to answer these question types. Let's go. In the IELTS speaking test Part 3, one of the common questions is that they will ask you to speculate, which basically means to investigate and try and predict what's going to happen in the future. Don't worry though, the examiner is not going to test your clairvoyancy skills, they're just looking at your ability to communicate in English, so don't worry if your predictions are silly or turn out to be wrong. Some examples that IELTS examiners might ask you when you're asked to speculate include things like, what do you think social media will be like in the future? Or, do you think more people will speak English in the next 20 years? We've already looked at these answers previously, but these are speculative questions. The language you need to use them is you need to use language for speculating or predicting. For example, if you think something is very likely to happen, you could say, it is highly likely that. You could say, it seems possible that, and then give your point. You could say something along the lines of, in my opinion, I doubt that, and then continue. You could say, I'm convinced that. And finally, I suppose it's possible that. And then after all these, you need to keep going with your point. Let's have a look at an example using this speculative language. In my opinion, it is highly likely that social media will be unrecognizable in 20 years. You could also use conditionals, for example, things like, if X happens, then I believe that Y is highly likely because. Or something along the lines of, I doubt Y will happen, especially because X. I think the reason for this may be, let's have a look at an example of this kind of speculative language. I'm convinced that if we are all living in VR in the future, then social media will be dramatically different. Let's see how it looks all together in a D.E.E.R structure. What would happen in your country if you had free healthcare? I'm convinced that it would make India a better place to live. Direct answer. Let's explain that. A lot of people are suffering with all kinds of different illnesses, and if we had free healthcare, people would be able to see a doctor even if they were poor. I think that this would improve a lot of people's standard of living. Give examples. For example, when people get sick and must pay for life-saving care, it devastates their finances, and they have to choose between medicine or being able to afford food. Most people choose food to survive, and then they never get better, so they become even more sick. So absolutely, free healthcare would be a blessing to my country. Here you can see the D.E.E.R method in action, and I hope now that by seeing it colour-coded and with some language for speculation, you can use this to help with your IELTS exam. Up next, how to evaluate. Evaluation questions tend to ask you to discuss the pros and cons, or the advantages and disadvantages, or maybe to measure other people's and your own opinion. Some common questions used to evaluate are things like, a lot of people think that dangerous sports should be banned in school. What do you think? What do you think about YouTube influencers behaving badly on camera? Or something like, what are the disadvantages of online shopping? The language you can use to answer these questions are evaluative language, such as, I think that's exactly how I feel. I'm not sure, it's a tough question, but if I had to say, then I suppose, not necessarily, in my opinion. Here's how to use evaluative language when answering in the D.E.E.R style. Let's have an example. A lot of people think that dangerous sports should be banned in school. What do you think? That's exactly how I feel. School is a place where students should be safe. If children are encouraged to be violent towards each other in sports such as football or rugby, then it will cause a lot of problems and people may get hurt. In my school, we were forced to play football and I broke my thumb. It could have been worse, but it wasn't a great experience. So yeah, I totally agree. And as you can see from my model answer, it is divided into direct answer, explanation, examples, and then restates the answer. Let's have a look at another example. What do you think about YouTubers behaving badly on camera? I don't know. Using I don't know here is fine because it's a direct answer, but then you need to explain. I suppose it's usually a negative thing to behave inappropriately all the time. On the other hand, YouTube influencers need to draw attention to themselves to make money, so they may need to act up occasionally. For instance, Logan Paul once filmed a dead body for his YouTube channel, and I think that is deplorable behaviour. But he is now a billionaire and helps lots of charities. It's a tough one. I hope you're still with me. I know this is a long video. We're going to do one more. We're going to look at how to answer compare and contrast questions for the IELTS speaking part 3. When you're asked to compare and contrast, it's asking you to make comparisons between two different things, and they sometimes ask for your opinion. Some example questions would be, what are the advantages of living in a city compared to living in the countryside? What do you think are the main differences between speaking face-to-face or by text message? Do you think it's better to enjoy your job or to earn a high salary? So let's have a look at some language for comparing and contrasting. To compare, you can use in the same way, likewise, comparatively, compared with, or similarly. And to contrast, you could use unlike, conversely, whereas, or in contrast. Let's have a look at how this works using the D.E.E.R method to answer IELTS Speaking Task Part 3 questions. You should be experts at this by now. What do you think the advantages of living in the city are compared to living in the countryside? I think that there are many. I love living in the city because there are so many things to do and see. Whereas in the countryside, I suppose it could get a little bit boring. On an evening after work, in the city I have many options, such as going to see a film at the movies, eating at a fancy restaurant, or even just going to the pub for a drink. Unlike the countryside, where I think I would end up doing things like reading or going on a hike. Living in a city has so many more advantages, in my opinion. Let's look at one more example. Do you think it's better to enjoy your job than earning a high salary? 100%. I think that if you have job satisfaction, then you don't need to be making millions of dollars. Money can bring a lot of stress, and high-paying jobs usually have the hours to match. I enjoy waking up in the morning looking forward to going to work. I get to do fun things all day, like talking to teenagers, making paper aeroplanes, and watching interesting lectures on YouTube. In contrast, my last job involved sitting in an office for 60 hours a week, which I hated, even though I was making 6 figures. It would be great to have both, but I'm certain that it's better to love your job. Whew, that was a long lesson, wasn't it? I hope you got a lot of value from this and you are now feeling much more confident in how to answer the IELTS Speaking Part 3 questions. In the description of this video, you can sign up for my upcoming free IELTS course. So sign up now, like the video, watch this video next. Good luck and smash those exams.